Welcome to this episode of Media Roundtable Industry Edition. If you've been keeping up with us, we've spent the last few years talking to leading voices in podcasts about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want it to have on the world. This is a true roundtable format, and like we say in the name, this is our industry edition. So it's going to be a lot less focused on creators and more about how media and audio industry experts can adapt to the news of the day. I'm your host, Jennifer Laine, sitting in for Dan Granger. I'm the head of marketing, innovation, and special projects at Oxford Road. And today I am joined by quite a prestigious panel. Bryan Barletta, guest on the show today, creator of Sounds Profitable. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Thanks for having me.
Neal Lucey, EVP of Strategy and Product at Oxford Road. Welcome back, Neal.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
And back by popular demand, Stu Redwine, VP of Creative Services at Oxford Road.
The one and only. Happy to be here.
Are you the only? Hopefully.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's dive straight in. So Neal, the first article that we want to discuss that we've seen in the news in the last couple of days is, does the podcast industry have a frequency capping issue? This is something we've talked about on our show a lot, but I think the new article you've pulled, which will be in the show notes and in the influencer this week, sort of goes into more depth than we've been into before. So do you want to give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, sure. And I'm super happy that we actually have the writer of the article with us today. So Bryan is here and he can get into it even more than I can. But, I think it's an interesting story, especially because frequency capping, I come from, a lot of my background is in the world of video. And if you watch CTV, you see the same ads running back to back. And so, as the podcast industry becomes more DAI, you kind of naturally have the worry that this will extend into the podcast space as well. So it was an interesting article for me. And I think it was on top of another article where, people still feel like the podcast industry is the Wild West. So I like the article because it was a really rigorous analysis of top podcasts, and they found that there really isn't a frequency capping issue. I mean, where there were issues is more related to sponsorships or exclusivities, but there were also a few shows that did stick out that did have a frequency capping issue where there were kind of multiple ads running back to back. And so it's just a watch out. It's a watch out for media buyers. It's watch out for marketers, that you do really have to keep a close eye on it. But all in all, there really isn't a big issue. And that was, I was starting to get that fear especially as DII becomes much more pervasive in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really motivated me to write the article was, and I've fallen victim to it as well, is we just keep repeating these same things in the industry, like, oh, this doesn't work, or that's a problem, or that's concerning. And I had like a moment, I had the right people around me. Pete Bersinger from Podscribe was able to get the data for me. And I was like, well, let's just prove it out. Let's look at the top 50 podcasts. We were able to get about 40 of them. Let's look at, the last 3 months worth of content, ideally 10 or more episodes. And then let's really dig into what frequency capping means. I mean, I binge a lot of podcasts. A lot of the stuff I listen to has multiple episodes, or I'm listening to 3 or 4 episodes in a day. I'm catching up on something that's years old, or, I fell behind by a month. And so does that count into it? And what I really focused on was the release cycle, right? If I said as an advertiser, I only want to be on 1 ad per week, 4 ads per month, and then Bryan listens to 12 episodes in a row and there's an ad in each of them, that's not violating frequency cap, because that was 3 months where it was 1 per week, because that was the cadence that the show was released. So I really narrowed frequency capping down to the individual episode. And, when we were planning this out, like, Neal, one of the things that you brought up, which is really great too, is like, connected TV has a massive problem of this. I personally dropped the Hulu ad-free tier 2 episodes in, because I kept getting a Google ad about like making it home before your dog dies, like 3 or 4 times in an episode. Sometimes it can pull you in if it's a different creative message, but what I think frequency capping really needs to be is once per episode for that advertiser, unless it's a unique creative, unless it's a quick shout out, 15 seconds or less, unless it's something unique and wanted. Just cramming it in through dynamic ad insertion or other means is not ideal for anybody.
I mean, as a listener, I completely agree with you. I know this is a personal thing, so I'm not speaking on behalf of many listeners, but whenever I hear the same commercial twice in one episode, I actually discredit the podcast because I think they just couldn't sell their ad space.
That's the inside baseball that we all have. We immediately do that. Or like when, you'll hear a podcast and you'll know the break's coming up and they'll be like, and now back to the show. You're like, ooh, who do I send that to? Who do I rag on for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of a couple minds. There's a part of me that thinks of like My Pillow when it comes to television and just pugilizing the viewers with a ton of frequency and what happened there. But so there's a part of me is like, well, even if it's the same old thing, if you repeat it enough, people believe it and they'll take action, possibly. But is it how detrimental is it? I wonder about that. But the other thing that it really makes me think of is more what you kind of alluded to, Bryan, and I think Neal, we had talked about, I know Neal had talked about internally, which is like opening up creatively to sequential messaging, right? So how do you set something up in the pre-roll that then pays off in the mid-roll and then possibly even pays off in the post-roll? That was something just today was talking about that for one of our advertisers of, setting something up in a mid-roll that then pays off in a post-roll and seeing how could that work, because we know that post-roll inventory is kind of a challenge. So could we incentivize somebody to stick around from a creative standpoint to hear, the end of a story or something like that?
I love that. I love the creative storytelling through ads, right? Taking advantage of the fact that you can layer that on through the story and really calling it content. I think that's not, I wouldn't even flag that as frequency capping, right? Like that is one ad spread, right? Instead of 3 ads broken up there. I mean, hopefully you're selling it as 3 ads. Like I hope the publisher's able to accomplish that.
Yeah, don't get ahead of yourself, Bryan.
but as a listener, like to me, that's just segments now. If done right, it's segments of content instead of an advertisement, and that's even more compelling.
Yeah, I thought that was a really important point in the article for me, and I think it's a really good reminder for marketers to have variety in your advertising. There are times where you're going to have multiple ads, you have a sponsorship running in the same program. So rather than run the same ad 4 times, bring variety to it, bring sequential messaging to it to, keep the listener engaged and not turn them off.
Neal, I don't know if this is a fair question, so you could totally not answer this if you don't feel prepared, but you mentioned that you've seen or you've done a lot of work historically in frequency capping in CTV. I wonder, when it comes to audience overlap, what applications could be applied for podcasts that have been historically held true for CTV, or is it just a completely different animal?
I do think it's completely different. I think that the one thing I think that happened in CTV was a lot of that inventory was being bought by digital buyers, where television buyers from the old world of broadcasting cable, they won't run an ad typically more than once per half hour. And I think that went away when CTV came to the forefront. So I think there's discipline, I think, on the buying community's aspect to make sure that, those caps are in place, that you're not running more than one ad unless it's intentional.
Mm-hmm. Well, that now actually, I guess, pretty seamlessly leads us into the next topic, which is yours, Bryan, about Netflix and their transition in ad supported. So walk us through the announcement from last week and sort of your take on it.
Yeah, so Netflix finally announced their ad-supported plan, which is really interesting. The lowest plan that you can get, I believe, at 720p for the resolution is $9.99 previously, and now it will be $6.99 a month, which is less than Disney Plus and Hulu with commercials, which are $7.99 a month. The commercials are supposed to be about 15 or 30 seconds in length, and it's the same resolution. And Netflix is claiming an average of 4 to 5 minutes of commercials in an hour, right? What's interesting about all of this is that Netflix is going to market with a $65 CPM, and they're working really hard to get people excited about this. But even just to catch up on that gap of going from the $9.99 to the $6.99, Netflix would need to serve 1.5 ads per account per day. Now, I don't think that that's crazy. I mean, if we're talking 4 to 5 minutes of commercials, and in an hour of content, you're going to be able to, one binge session or one evening of watching, you might be able to accomplish a whole week or a month. So they're going to have plenty of inventory. But these are some really interesting metrics to hit, and it's really, I don't know, it's really interesting as a parallel to podcasting, who is ad supported going towards subscription, where this is subscription going towards ad supported. It's going to show you the different models there. So love to hear some comments on that for how all of you view that.
I mean, I think, it's not an original thought from me. I love listening to Pivot with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, but he was just talking about how much is invested in Netflix per account, right? How over invested the space is, as they have to move it to some kind of subscription model. So what I wonder is, as it moves to the ad supported, if you're going to see a degradation in the quality of the shows, right? Because they're just not going to be able to keep investing the same levels that they were in the entertainment. They're trying to make it up on the advertising side of it. And is this the canary in the coal mine, that all of a sudden Netflix, the quality of the programming is going to start getting pulled down?
Yeah, when all there is on there is Futurama and Friends reruns and Scrubs and things like that, because that's what people continue to watch over and over again, and the ads sell like crazy there. Are we going to drive away, like the Netflix just did, or is actively in a year of creating tons of original content? Maybe that's not what sells. Maybe that doesn't make its money up with the figures you're sharing there. And also, like, a major point, I have very much invested in like a quality 4K TV and surround sound. There's no way I would save that money and go with the 720p resolution. So what does that say about the audience too, right? These are people that want to save $3 a month, or brand new to Netflix, and that, extra $3 is a marker for them. But they're primarily likely people watching on their phone, where the resolution doesn't matter, right? So maybe a younger audience, which is great there, but could also mean no disposable income or less. This isn't appealing to their high income or high earning audience. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the results of the campaigns run. If it's branded, I think it'll do great. But I think when we look at Spotify closing 11 podcasts, right? That was the big news recently. And in the podcast space, we're all kind of upset about that, right? Like Spotify bought them and made them exclusive and did all that. Netflix is going to cut a lot of stuff in the next 3 to 6 months, considering how quickly Netflix decides to greenlight a season 2 or not. We're going to see some massive changes if this becomes their primary revenue, or even just a strong channel for them.
I wonder, I haven't looked at, or I haven't changed my subscription model, so I am not on this lower price point, but for anyone who has, I wonder if they'll be able to, especially for mobile viewership, I wonder if they're able to directly click through to a landing page or some sort of like direct response from this new ad supported format.
They look to be interactive ads. They look to be like a video unit played with some sort of like L-shaped banner I've seen on some of them.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be really neat. I think they're going to have to build the ads there. It will be programmatic at some point or to some degree, but I think there's going to be a nice custom aspect to it, which will drive people towards them and allow them to reuse some assets, but give Netflix the upper hand on charging that $65 CPM. But that click-through is really powerful.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned programmatic, but they also in the article directly referenced some brand safety or suitability layer applied on top of it. I wonder if they're going with Zephyr or what provider they're using to do that in order to have brands avoid anything that's unsuitable or unsavory, is a direct quote from CNBC.
Well, they have a great advantage there because their content's all scripted. Right? Like it's produced, it's stuff they upload to their server, they're able to process all that. I actually would flip the script and say that Netflix, while they might go to market saying that, I think more than anything, they're going to run the ads through that brand safety and suitability and make sure that the ads are appropriate for the content. I think they know their content inside and out.
Duality of application.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because they'll go to market selling it as an advertiser tool, but in reality, it's going to be what protects their users, because bad ads bring it down.
That's what we've been talking about that a lot with the work we're doing with barometers. So many times advertisers, as an example, last week, an advertiser uploaded an ad that said it was a book and it was a book launch and everything was related, and the host approved a book commercial, and it ended up being a book it was in fact a book for a book launch, but it was very, very far right leaning content, and the messaging supporting the book launch targeted that type of audience. And there was a bit of an internal issue, as you could imagine. So I think having the ability to run ads through that, so a host can then, or a show as an example, or Netflix can make sure it's a good and applicable partnership would make a lot of sense.
Completely
Yeah.
agree.
I think it's really interesting that Netflix is introducing the ad supported tier. I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on everybody else that's in the connected TV space that's trying to charge subscription costs and trying to gain subscribers of their services, because Netflix has 60% coverage of the US already. There's, so it is kind of capping out, I think, on the people that are going to pay a lot for the subscription. But the tier, I think, opens up a lot of sampling among people that have been on the fence, who haven't been able quite to justify the cost for the current subscription. So I think that that's really interesting. And I think if you're a brand advertiser, I think brand advertisers would love to get the Netflix audience. So $65 CPM, if we're in the response world, is pretty, it's a steep cost to pay. But if you're a brand advertiser that wants to run an NFL, wants to reach people that are harder to reach in television, becomes a little bit more, justifiable to pay that amount, because you're getting a really exclusive audience.
This actually falls directly in line with another article that you guys launched, Bryan, Barletta, this week or last week on your podcast, about them in Spotify introducing a new measurement tool. Do you want to dive into that a little bit deeper?
Yeah, we flagged this in the download, our Thursday podcast, like kind of recapping the space of podcasting and other ad tech stuff. And we highlighted that Netflix, ahead of all of this, has signed a measurement deal with both DoubleVerify and Integral Ad Science to bring their measurement capabilities to Netflix ad-supported tier. And the reason that this was worth bringing up in a podcast about the podcast space was that Spotify recently signed a deal with IAS. And instead of saying that they're going to be using IAS's technology to bring these measurements and viewability and all these like buyer safety tools in place, that Spotify and IAS will build something custom and new together.
Right.
So Netflix at $65 CPM, with a massive opportunity here to just say, hey, we're a walled garden, we're not playing ball with anything. Instead said, hey, we're signing up with everybody and we're going to offer exactly what they have and we're going to fall in line, which is really powerful. Yeah. They based on the fact that Spotify basically said we're going to do our own thing, Netflix could have said, like, there's no measurement here, you trust us or you don't, and people would have still paid $65. But buying into standards and buying into third-party partners really shows that they're here to be part of a space. And to me, sometimes that's a stark contrast to what we have in podcasting. I mean, we're seeing that rise with Spotify as our primary siloed channel, and every choice they make is going to be compared to bigger industry. As podcasting is still growing, what the actions that Spotify makes are more directly comparable to Netflix than what podcasting is doing to like CTV. So that stands out, right? Like a sore thumb, building your own methodology with a third party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say that I think Netflix has also embraced Nielsen DAR to provide ratings delivery to their service. So the embracing of third parties to provide that verification, to provide ratings information, really, I think, makes the service and the property really attractive to advertisers.
Yeah.
Because everybody's using them in other spaces, and so it just makes it a lot easier just to start, and there's less friction to begin advertising on the service.
And they partnered with Microsoft as well. I mean, Netflix is really going about this the right way. They are launching with as many partners as possible in the areas that build confidence for people who are going to be trying this out new, right? They're doing everything they can to say that $65 should stay, because day one, they're going to be set up with all of these confidence building partnerships, right? Spotify does command a higher CPM, but they're building something unique. So they're asking you to trust them and trust what they're going to build next and trust their higher price point. I think it stands out very different.
Yeah, I think it's a hard pill to swallow, Bryan. Of course, you and I have talked about this a lot with making sure that companies aren't grading their own homework or asking you to jump across the river and trust them and or adopt the language or the framework or the infrastructure that they're developing internally. We've seen that with Spotify and Assembly. We've seen that with iHeart and Sounder. It is very reassuring to see Netflix set this sort of goal for companies, and I hope it does trickle into podcast in one or two different ways, definitely.
Yeah, the beauty of third-party verification is it's third party, right? Everybody can grade their own homework pretty well, but it's good to have a third party. And I mean, as agencies, there's auditing companies that are auditing our work all the time, our pricing. So everybody, I think, is used to having third parties that have visibility and are making sure that people are delivering what they say they're delivering. So I think that, I mean, it's really critical to bring credibility to all aspects of advertising.
You're saying it's important to substantiate your claims, Neal?
Yeah.
So somebody, like if you're working on a marketing message, like you'd want substantiation as a key component of whether or not I should trust you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know,
yeah, I think so.
Not a bad thing.
So. No, not at all. We're the best. Trust me. No. We're number one. My mom says we're number one.
Well, and speaking of substantiation, perfect segue, Stu, the ANA's message to advertisers: audio is a powerhouse medium substantiated by a third party.
Yes, exactly. By the senior VP of media at the ANA, Mark Stewart. So he was talking about at this time, at a moment like this, you know, these are the kind of articles and stories that we see, the impact and the importance of audio, right? It is, it's incredible, the reach that audio has. So I will just substantiate it in that ANA pointed to a study done last year by Nielsen that 15 brands which added audio to their marketing mix increased their monthly reach by 36%. And they also saw results across 14 different product categories. Nielsen revealed that audio delivered a better than 5-to-1 return on investment for those advertisers. And so, you know, of course, at Oxford Road, it's like kind of like you're saying, like, haha, you know, audio works. There's reasons why audio works. And I also think as audio continues to evolve with the different aspects of audio, podcast and streaming, and our abilities to target cohorts better, you know, you've just got a pricing piece that's working to your advantage, and you've got a reach piece that's working to your advantage. And they also pointed out in here, albeit they didn't substantiate, so I'm just going to go with it, but I believe it, so I kind of have an a priori position, that audio is very persuasive, because, you know, something visual, we see it with our eyes and we kind of dismiss or we engage. Audio goes inside, and our brain, you can choose to dismiss or engage, right? But if you're actively listening and you're lean in, like podcast is, like the powers of the theater of the mind come into play, and you're interacting with it, like inside your head. You're not just dismissing or choosing. And especially with something that on drive time, the morning show, people aren't willy-nilly on their morning show. There's the morning show they like and the hosts that they love, and their podcast, it's people that they choose. That creates intentionality and an intimacy for this medium that is this is going on inside of our heads. And so those marketing messages already have all that mental availability from the show and the salience because of how engaged the listener is. You combine that with better pricing and incredible reach, and you really have a powerhouse in these times when people are looking for ways to put their dollars to the best use.
I think podcast is wonderful for a million reasons. Otherwise, I shouldn't be doing this. But one of the things that I particularly love is like it allows you enough space to project your own sort of desire or your own thoughts or your own feelings on the host. You're not able to see them. You're not able to really make sure they're making eye contact with you. You're not able to like make a snap judgment on their outfit or anything like that. And so whenever I'm listening, like I view my hosts and I'm projecting this persona that they know me very intimately, that we're very close friends, that they look exactly how I want them to look. They do exactly what I want them to do. And I think that it's such an underrated and not talked about enough element of podcasts, because they are in your head and it is the most intimate medium, and they're able to persuade you in ways that that other mediums can't generally do. And I think it's because you don't have the full picture. You make up the full picture and it feels more personalized than any other channel would.
It's so funny listening to both of you talk about this, because like it's all the same words that I'm repeating, and I keep trying to figure out what it is. Like when I got into advertising and mobile advertising, it was neat because mobile advertising was new at the time, right? The app store was new, helping individual like app developers monetize their podcasts and talking to each individual ones. But then it grew to the point where like I wasn't dealing with the app developer. I was dealing with like 5 layers away from them. I was an order form for them. I was not, like, the connection wasn't there anymore. CTV and Hollywood and all these things, right? Like video doesn't call up the talent. Like someone working in advertising doesn't call up the talent for the show and say, hey, can you do an ad read? Like we need a pickup for this. Podcasting is close and it's connected and we're all working together. We're dealing with the hosts directly. We're dealing with the advertisers directly. We're getting them excited about it. We're here because we're passionate about it. And all these platitudes and audio as a powerhouse, like I think a big thing is that we also are very clear when an advertiser is like, I want this, I want it executed this way, and I want these type of results. I don't think we're afraid as an industry to say, well, that doesn't work that way. Here's how it could work, and here's where we'd like you to be here, but we're not going to just take your money. It's not, just run a banner ad. It'll resolve, it'll attribute. So I think this space is cool. It is close to both the content and the brand. It allows for a flexibility and a connectiveness that doesn't exist. You're talking about them being your friends. I'm struggling so hard to get back into audiobooks because it doesn't feel like a conversation that I'm sitting around.
It's not a conversation. It's not personal. It's not that deep connection that you feel, even though there's a detachment. You've likely never met any of these people that you're listening to.
Yeah. And that's I think that's a really powerful thing. And one of the notes that you brought up earlier, or that's in the document that we're looking through, is that this is growing so big that Adweek has its first audio track. Like, exactly. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was going to add that. I mean, I think the story from ANA, the $5 ROAS, I think those were P&G brands actually too. So that's not bad either. And then I think there was a $14 ROAS for retail advertisers.
Yeah, spot on. So yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah, you're right.
So I think, you think back, I think retailer advertisers have kind of always, embrace the power of audio, especially to drive store traffic, right? So it's great to see that other brands can benefit, and it speaks to the power. You have terrestrial that provides reach on par with television at a fraction of the CPM. You have the engagement of podcasts. You have kind of the ability to broaden your reach via streaming and even smart speakers. So it's a really, there's a lot under the audio umbrella, and kind of piecing it all together can be really powerful for marketers.
You mentioned Ad Age. The day this will go live is the day that Ad Age is happening in New York here. So in 2 weeks' time, we will definitely have a recap on it. Dan Granger, CEO and founder of Oxford Road, is going to be there on the ground in person. So I'm excited to hear his recap. I'm curious to see who's on stage. I'm very keen to understand what they're talking about, but such a significant deal. First time ever Ad Age at Advertising Week. In tandem, it's the IAB's Audio Leadership Summit. So we're sort of dividing and conquering. But I mean, if not now, when? If you're not on board with audio, you're going to be too late.
Yeah. And I saw in this week's, I got this on Friday, I guess, in this week's Ad Week is just with the view, with podcasts being everywhere. Conan O'Brien, after reinventing late night, he's doing the same with podcasting. Who says he can't be serious? Serious spelled SIRIUS. So.
Clever.
I'll take it. Yeah, that person deserves some credit. That's clever.
Yeah, but it's just that podcasting is it's so on everybody's. It like you guys are saying, it's having such a moment.
Next, Bryan, ESPN nears large new partnership deal with DraftKings. So walk us through what's happening there. Is it final? Is it pending?
It's apparently an anticipated deal that was covered in Bloomberg. And, from the news, the stock of DraftKings rose as much as 8.8% in response to it on this past, or I guess the Friday before that this is coming out. What's interesting here is that ESPN already, and as Disney, when they acquired Fox Entertainment, did have some stake in DraftKings already, but they pretty much avoided sports betting. Right, ESPN has avoided sports betting. In the download, we also note that ESPN or Disney rather, their cruise ships don't have casinos on boards and they don't have licensed slot machines. But sports betting is big business, and podcasting has been a great avenue for people to target by states that allow it, whether digital or in person. And we pinged Sean Russo over at Magellan when we were writing our article about it. And one of the things that he said was he looked at fantasy sports as an industry, and he said in August it was up 22% year to date, and that the industry tends to peak in September. So that wasn't even the highest that we had seen. It's already the spend had already more than doubled August and September, and that's primarily driven by brands like FanDuel and DraftKings. Podcasting as an avenue to reach these specific markets, the people that are interested in that type of content, and put an ad that is complementary to it in front of it. I mean, there's so many sports betting podcasts, there's so many sports podcasts, there's so many opinions about that type of inventory out there already. I don't know. I think that this is really interesting. I even parallel it to like cannabis, for example, right? The ability to target and look at these things that are only legal in certain areas right now. Podcasting can deliver on that. You can have ads that tell you a different story when you're in a legal state or not. Come to California or Denver or whatnot and experience this versus like, something just broadcasting everywhere, falling on deaf ears. So I think this is a big deal for podcasting, because I think podcasting has seen a lot of spend for sports betting, and we are aiming as high as we can to get those billions in ad spend in podcasting up.
Yeah, I think I was going to say, it's just recognition that, I mean, how ingrained sports betting is in our lives, and it's always been there, right? So it's, the ability to kind of continually legitimize what is happening, what has always been happening.
Yeah.
It's making it more of a legitimate business, right? So I think it's interesting. I thought it was interesting that I read an article like KGO up in San Francisco. It has changed format. So it was, iconic news talk station, and it's changed formats to, a format that's focused on sports betting. So there's the content available, and there's the listeners and the consumers that want to consume that content.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I like you said, legitimizing it, I think, is really attractive too, because the money that's spent on this and the regulations that are put in place drive these people and these organizations to hold accountability for the people who need help too, right? So the bigger these organizations get, the more spend they have, the more authority they have to advertise. I mean, the more responsibility there also is put on them for services to help people who have gambling addictions and whatnot like that, instead of it still being something that people have access to, but there's no money put towards services. So
right.
If legitimizing it only helps everybody, it's still going to exist. So that's great. And ESPN is a major podcast player.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, Neal, to your point about it being so ubiquitous and in the fabric of the culture, I think from a performance standpoint, there's also, we need to target people where they can do this activity legally. But when it comes to the programs and the content, if it's incredibly ubiquitous, and it doesn't just need to be in sports betting shows or even just in sports shows, that's where performance is that sometimes, when we come at the stuff creatively, it's like that Eric Tim, great job, good show. They did a little bit where there's a TV ad for one person in like Indianapolis or something like that. It's like, Neal, Lucey, this ad is for you. And it was so hyper focused. You got to think that there's whatever, true crime, science fiction, whatever, all kinds of hosts that are, at the break, they're talking about their favorite sports team. They're doing some sports betting. And so there's opportunities just in just there where it's not just going to be in the sports shows and in the sports betting shows.
I guess I have a question for you, Stu, as it relates to sort of ad copy and geolocation. I know we've done some work like this for our clients that sort of coordinated what you heard in the ad with what the weather was that day in the town that they're in. I wonder how much ad copy should be personalized for sports betting in specific states, and how much we can do on our end is like ad agencies and brands placing these ads in order to ensure that they're a little bit stronger, they're more localized, and they have a higher promise of return eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of persuasion 101 stuff. You know, it's any of us who have gone to a concert and seen our favorite rock star. They talk about how much they love this city. You know, they're like, I'm from Kansas City, right? So if they actually knew about Bartle Hall, I saw those crazy sculptures on top of Bartle Hall. I knew I was in Kansas City. Let's hear Kansas City. You know, like, yeah, I got some Arthur Bryant's barbecue right before the show. It's like, oh my God, he knows me. He loves me. So anytime you can personalize, I think it is helpful, particularly in something that involves state lines and regulations. Like, yeah, I think you would want to customize the message. We've done a little bit of this. And there's a lot of really cool ways out there, frequency ads, 1 million ads, to do produce spots that slot in different messages based on where somebody is located. But my general response would be, if it is something, one, it helps to customize regardless. And that's actually what the hosts are doing, if you think about it. And then two, when it comes to something that I can only get in Kansas, but I can't get in Missouri, then I need to identify that and talk about that and be talking to those people. I think there's also a case to be made, like somebody here commented earlier, you know, it's like, well, come on over to such and so place so you can do it. Like, well, I mean, that would be interesting messaging to see, especially if, I mean, come on.
The customization is killer though.
Yes,
but like what you were saying there, like I Adthos is a platform that I actually just got a demo of, and we're doing a deep dive with, and it's really neat because they showed me an API to pull in sports scores. And so they write these ads, and it's just like, at McDonald's, grab a Big Mac and celebrate your win or losses. Here's the scores, right? And so imagine you're listening to an ESPN podcast, and now McDonald's can get in on like telling you what the sports score is, and now you have a positive association, right?
Or a super negative one because McDonald's told you the score and you were waiting to go home and watch it. Little did you know this ad was gonna ruin it for you.
Well, that's that would be fun too. Then you offer a coupon, you know, get $2 off your sadness happy meal, right? Like,
Neal, I know we've done a lot recently. Some of our bigger clients are putting more money into sports as a genre in general. Could you speak to why and how those conversations are happening, and sort of any of the results that you're seeing so far, what the intention behind shifting dollars into sports was, and how we're doing it?
I mean, I think it comes out of the audience research that we do day in, day out for our customers, and, you know, and places that, you know, that we advertise. And we have a lot of B2B clients. They appeal, you know, the sports podcasters have a strong appeal to that type of a B2B owner audience. So we see that in the research, and those podcasters are compelling endorsers. I mean, you know, they've put brands on the map in the past. So I think that they've always been there. There's a lot of content available, and there's credible endorsers available to endorse your products and reach broad audiences. So I mean, I think that we see it in the audience research that we do, and when we see that, we bring it to our clients.
Absolutely. Okay, so to transition this as easily as possible, Neal, if you can listen to a current interview by any sports hero who is no longer with us, who would it be?
A sports hero that's no longer with us. Wow, that's a good one. That's a
Bryan and Stu, you can volunteer your thoughts here as well.
Muhammad Ali.
Okay,
yeah,
Muhammad
that's
Ali.
A really good
that's
one.
a good one.
Who's interviewing him?
Me.
Okay, brilliant.
Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is interviewing Muhammad Ali.
I guess for me, it's Will Chamberlain.
Thank you for that.
Will Chamberlain.
Will Chamberlain,
Okay.
because there's all like the GOAT conversations in basketball, and Michael Jordan's kind of the anointed GOAT. But Wilt Chamberlain just was amazing, an amazing athlete at a time when people didn't see him, scored 100 points. He averaged ridiculous numbers. And I think he was a pretty interesting guy with some interesting things to say.
Would you have Michael Jordan interview him?
Yeah, that would be cool. Or maybe
Is
Kareem.
that possible? Is that possible these
Maybe
days?
Kareem.
If only this were possible. Yeah.
If only there was a way to do this.
So that brings us to the last article of the day. Neal, Joe Rogan, Steve Jobs. Tell us what happened, what AI brought to the world.
Yeah, this is amazing. So if you are listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, you must listen to this AI generated interview between Joe Rogan and Steve Jobs. It's just it's really cool on one hand, but it's a little bit scary on the other hand, because it really is a pretty free-flowing interview, and it's amazing how through AI you can kind of piece together questions with answers and make it sound like it's really current. So what I think is really cool about it is this is an opportunity to kind of bring kind of historical content and make it more current. If I'm a kid growing up and I'm studying history, maybe I can listen to a podcast of Joe Rogan interviewing FDR, for instance, right? So, that there's kind of that cool aspect to it. I think the other aspect is kind of the initial place I went with it was, okay, so people can fake interviews and kind of get listeners that way by kind of piecing together interviews with historical figures and passing it off as real content. So I think there's kind of the dual edge to that, of really being really interesting, being able to bring fresh content to listeners, but also a little bit scary in what people can do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think here, obviously, we knew it wasn't real because it was prefaced that way, and all the marketing surrounding that was that it was powered by AI, but you get into some real misrepresentation issues, especially when it comes to people who are still alive. Obviously, Joe Rogan's still alive, but Steve Jobs is no longer with us. And I won't even begin to address sort of the legality challenges that are ahead of us when it comes to elements like that, but it is a very cool, I mean, you could see it being played out in a number of different ways. I mean, historical tours, like different interviews with people who are substantial to get them to like a more contemporary audience and a more contemporary voice, to really have that be a tool that's now in the tool belt is remarkable. I mean, what a world.
Yeah, I
mean, we thought Tupac showing up at Coachella was exciting.
Yeah.
Whole other level.
I think from like, you think with the brand safety stuff, like what if the AI interviewee said something incendiary? Like, is that the AI? Is that the estate? I got to imagine Steve Jobs' estate is who released the tapes, or were these recordings in the public domain? I also think of just the fact that people are busy. And I've got a couple kids, I've got a 14 and a 13-year-old. I would not be surprised to have either one of them go, "Oh, Dad, there's this cool interview of Joe Rogan talking to that Apple guy." Well, he's dead, honey. No, he's not. He was on this show. That chain of event, like just like you're busy and you hear, well, he died, right? That coach died. No. I mean, he was just on that program last week. So it creates this like weird alternate reality where it's like, well, is he dead or is he alive? Who does Brad Pitt now need to secure all the rights to anybody doing a recording of him, an AI representation of him after he's gone? But the bigger thing I thought of was the kind of fake news, how it could open us even more to fake news.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Steve Jobs is alive and well.
Yeah, it's the whole thing's so interesting. I mean, my voice is synthesized. I work with Veritone for it, and they've done a synthetic version of my voice. It's watermarked. It's really interesting and all that. And I went with them last year to Voice AI, which actually just ran another version of its conference this year. It was really interesting because I thought it was going to be all about selling this technology and using it. And what it was actually was like an ethics conversation. Every single panel I was in, That's all anybody wanted to talk about. The groups that are driving this understand that until people are comfortable with it, until they feel that they can watermark things appropriately, that the detection methods, the tools that are being used to create it, the bleeding edge ones that are being used for things like having Luke Skywalker's voice from the original movies in The Mandalorian, right? Like having his face, having all those things, the tools that are being used.
Or
to
Iceman in Maverick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And all those tools that are being used to create those companies are working with distribution platforms like all the social media companies, all the video and audio platforms that have it there to provide detection methods and the ways to look for their watermarks. So that if there's no watermark, because say somebody just uploads it about someone who's not popular enough to have that type of technology used on them, they can use those tools to run that content through there first. There is the chicken and the egg, like being reactionary to it is great. Like you just said, your daughters, your kids are basically telling you, hey, this thing's real. No, he is alive. And now you have to correct that once it gets out, right? Like, how do you do damage control in there? So I guess so I'm really optimistic on like the future of it, but I think that the entire industry understands that if they don't have a clear solution for it, it can't get mass adoption and people will be afraid of it. So it's neat where they're prioritizing things.
Yeah, I would say that if you're scared by this, or if you think it's the coolest thing ever, take a listen. It's 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not a 2.5-hour interview. So, it's about 20 minutes of your time. And it's just interesting to kind of hear like how the questions and the answers really kind of just, I mean, you can kind of see a little bit of like that there is some forced aspects. There's some laughter from Steve Jobs. It kind of like isn't in the right place, it seems, but the questions and the answers do really flow together well in general.
Yeah, no, it was incredible to listen to. I recommend it to everybody. It is, you can tell there is something that's just like slightly off and you can't really put your finger on it until you actually know what's going on. But I can verify that this conversation is not recorded through an AI version of any of this.
Okay. It would be a lot smarter. It would be a much more intelligent conversation if it was, at least for this guy. I need a computer giving my answers.
Really good conversation, guys. Thank you so much, Bryan. We loved having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Shout out to promote your own podcast, to promote your own website, Ready, Set, Go.
Yeah, check out soundsprofitable.com. We do research. We do weekly newsletters, podcasts, everything to get people caught up on the business of podcasting and how they can be involved, monetization, all of those things. Like we really dig into how to be in this business and how to grow yourself in the business.
Excellent. You've been a great friend to the agency, and we look forward to having you back on the show in the not so distant future. This show is dedicated to our mission of mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism. We want you to not just know the news, but use it for good. If you're a marketer looking to balance your business objectives with your brand values, please reach out to our agency, Oxford Road. Visit oxfordroad.com, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to our guests and to Bianca, Kyle, Spencer, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.